to this latest webinar from NCFE. Today we're going to look at Trailblazers and endpoint assessment in a little bit more detail perhaps than what some other webinars or other events that have gone through. My name is Paul Turner. I'm part of the Futures and Insight team, the policy team. And I've been involved in apprenticeships since the mid-1980s and Trailblazers since they were first mooted away back in 2013-14. So hopefully what I'm seeing will make a little bit of sense. So what we're going to look at today, just a quick review of the apprenticeships, the vision of them, raising the quality, why it's deemed necessary. What do new apprenticeships contain? And we're going to look at a standard and an assessment plan in a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about pre-gateway delivery, what that means, and then we're going to look at endpoint assessment and some of the aspects around that which might cause difficulties or not, if the case may be. A quick recap of the levy, although there's basically no recap to give other than what we already know because I haven't had any updates yet. And then a few pointers about getting ready for delivery and assessment. And then a quick follow-up on what our involvement has been and where NCFE are looking to be. And then we'll take some questions. If there's questions pop up as and when, that's absolutely fine. I'll try and answer them as we're going. But the majority of the time, I hope, we'll be looking at the actual standard and the plan and the endpoint assessment side and what it all actually means and trying to demystify some of it. So, the vision for apprenticeships. What's this all about? Well, it all stems back to the Future of Apprenticeships in England from 2013, which basically sets out a new vision for apprenticeships in England. And we need to be clear on that, as usual. It's England only this applies to, not Scotland, not Northern Ireland, and not Wales. What do we have? Well, it pulls together a few new aspects and a few new ideas. So the fact that we've got new apprenticeship standards, the introduction of an endpoint assessment system, and the reforms to funding. The interim funding that we have at the moment with the caps or bands, whatever you want to call them, as well as the introduction of the levy, which we'll talk a little bit about later. The key point of the reforms is to make the apprenticeships employer-led as opposed to SSC and framework-driven, although some people might argue that the SSCs to a degree represent the employers and some people might argue differently. The whole idea of these reforms though was to actually make it employer-led with input from others rather than others with input from employers. And what does this mean? Well, it means potential departure from qualifications and or regulated provision, and it also means that there is a big need for support in the delivery and endpoint assessment for employers because it's a lot of things here are new to them. We know from our experience working with Trailblazers that some of the concepts around development of standards, about how to write them and how to actually assess those particular standards that have been written are alien to employers unless they've been involved in the education system itself. Raising the quality, another aspect of the whole idea of reform. The employers now define full competence of a job role. And at the moment there's quite a few job roles that have been defined out there. The process of how competence is achieved has been freed up apparently and now focuses on the outcome through the use and the using of an independent assessment process, which again is, you know, it's not new but it is a different take on how we assess apprenticeships compared to what we used to with frameworks. The quality ensures that apprenticeships are only for those in a new job role, and that's a key bit of text there. In the past, we had apprenticeships who were people or employees, staff who were doing a job and they were moved on to apprenticeship. Under the new regime, under the new system, technically the apprenticeship should be for a new job role, a newly created job role, not one that already exists. So we may see some movement and some different kind of changes to the way job roles are looked at over the coming years. And lastly, it puts the purchasing power into the hands of employers via the levy system. Again, we're still struggling with the levy system, how it works. We know a little bit, but we don't exactly know how it's all going to be set up, who's going to be accessing how much, when, what, and why. We also are not too sure about, you know, how SMEs are going to be involved. But again, we'll look at that a little bit later. So, onto the nitty-gritty. What do the new apprenticeships contain? Right, well, there's two key parts we have here to apprenticeships, the new apprenticeships under the Trailblazer program. We have the apprenticeship standard and the assessment plan. So the apprenticeship standard to begin with is a document that defines the knowledge, skills and behaviours that an apprentice must achieve and prove competence in by the end of their time on the program. It usually covers 2 sides of A4, and I remember when that first came out and we all had a little bit of a laugh that the font size was going to be 0.3 and you needed a microscope to actually read what was contained in the standard. But actually some of them aren't too bad. They've come out quite well. When you look at a page or 2 pages of a standard side by side, they are text heavy, but I think that's the way they're meant to be. That's the way they've got to look. However, some are actually 4 pages long, 4 sides long. I can think of the equestrian, I think, is 3.5, and I think there's a couple of engineering ones, or auto tech, or aerospace or something, which go further than the 2 sides as well. And at the end of the day, it was always a case of 2 sides. If it needs to be more, then it can be, but you need to run the past the minister type thing. Just so we'll have a little bit of context and a few bits and pieces of data and information about currently what's out there with regards to the standards. A lot of things were updated yesterday, which is quite handy seeing as this webinar is today. At the moment, according to the latest updates on the government website, we currently have ready for delivery 120 apprenticeship standards across 54 sectors. So, you know, we're looking at very specific job roles we're talking about here. We're not talking about a framework which covers quite a few. We're talking about a standard for a job role. With regards to the number of organisations which can assess against those on as an endpoint assessment organisation, we currently have 18. Not a lot for when you think there's 120 standards out there. And those particular figures work out at 5 professional or trade bodies are on the register, 8 awarding organisations, 1 employer, 1 SSC, and only 2 providers. So providers listening out there, there's only 2 of you at the moment, one of which is a private provider, one of which is a college, actually on the register of apprentice assessment organisations. Now I do know from having a chat with a contact in the SFA that there are some difficulties with providers perhaps not looking really at what's required with regards to getting onto that register. So it may well be that we look at something in the future, exactly what it means and the kinds of information that we need to think about with regards to being an endpoint assessment organisation rather than just looking at it. The updated register for apprenticeship assessment organisations was done yesterday, so it should say the 1st of August. It still did say the 1st of August this morning. And at the moment, our last figure, there are 374 separate occupational roles either ready for delivery, underway or proposed for development. So there's quite a few bits and bobs going on out there. The assessment plan is a different beast altogether. It can be anywhere between 8 or 9 and 30 pages in size and contains basically when and how the independent endpoint assessment process will take place and how it takes place. And this is a really, really important document. It provides the information on what assessment methods will be used, what their grading criteria are if required, and there's not many that don't have any grading criteria in there, when the assessment will take place, who can be an independent assessor, and whether any qualifications need to be achieved before the point assessment takes place, because there are some, and we're going to look at one, where 2 qualifications actually need to be achieved before even going forward for endpoint assessment. The assessment plan is a key document that needs to be understood fully, and I've just put on there, get to know them thoroughly. So whatever occupations you're working in, and whatever sectors and qualifications that you already run, look at the assessment plan and take it to bits piece by piece. We're going to look through one in a little bit of detail in a couple of moments. So, but first, let's have a look at a standard. This is the standard for the newly ready for delivery adult care worker at level 2. Now it is 2 sides, as you can see. I couldn't make it any bigger, so please accept my apologies if the writing's a little bit small. But I've highlighted a few bits and pieces in on the copy I've got in front of it, so if you can, you can have a try at following. First of all, you've got the occupation, quite clearly states adult care worker. Under that, under the second, the large paragraph there, you've got the role profile. In other words, what the successful candidate should be able to do at the end of the apprenticeship. So it gives an overview on where they need to be working, the kind of activities that need to be undertaken, locations, etc. And it also indicates the personal attributes and behaviours that all adult care workers carrying out their roles should have, and it's the 6 C's which I'm hoping anybody that works in the care sector should be familiar with: care, compassion, courage, communication, competence, and commitment. So that's sort of the introduction to the actual standard itself. You then have underneath two smaller boxes which show the duration and the level. So this is at level 2. And the duration is between 12 and 18 months, but there's a little bit of a proviso on that which comes out in the assessment plan. That's why you really have to look at both of these documents together. And then we'll go into what the adult care worker must know and understand. So we have a range of sections there with a number of pointers, and these are the areas that are looked at when the assessment of knowledge takes place, and we'll look at how it's actually assessed after we've just gone through this next bit. The second big area there, A to F, is what the adult care worker must be able to do. So these are the practical activities that really need to be nailed in order for the adult care worker to prove their practical competence in what it is that they're doing. Towards the bottom we have a qualifications box. And it clearly states, and it's something I'll come back to later, qualifications: the level 2 diploma in health and social care, adults only, for England, brackets QCF, although QCF no longer exists, it's still there. This qualification, promoted and valued by employers, is achieved by a combination of direct teaching and self-directed learning. So this particular standard does need the learner to actually undertake and achieve the level 2 diploma in health and social care before they go forward for their endpoint assessment. So to a degree it's not a lot different to what is currently in place. You have to do this for the current level 2 framework, so you now have to continue to do this for this new apprenticeship standard. It's just the way the assessment afterwards takes place. And progression, well, the apprenticeship proves an identity into the occupation and progression throughout the sector. And then industry-specific requirements, almost every standard has these somewhere. And what it clearly states in this one is that a learner must undertake the enhanced disclosure and barn service, DBS process, and provide the results prior to starting the apprenticeship. So that all has to be done before they actually are enrolled on the apprenticeship, not during it or within a certain period. They'll have to prove it before they actually start. And also the care certificate at level 2 must be achieved as part of the apprenticeship standard as well. So what we have now is pre-starting the apprenticeship they must have to provide the DBS certificate, and then throughout the actual apprenticeship on program side before the endpoint assessment they have to take and achieve the care certificate and the level 2 diploma in health and social care for adults. So it's not too different, but it is, if you see where I'm coming from. It looks different, the standards, there's still qualifications in there, but technically those qualifications are for the on-programme work only and don't really count, apart from that they've achieved them for the endpoint assessment. And it's, you know, that's the kind of difference that we see now. Review date, we've got September 2017, but I think that's because it's been floating around for a little while. So the review date is normally 3 years of the actual assessment standard, apprenticeship standard being put together. So what does the assessment plan look like? Right, these are the first 2 pages. The assessment plan itself is 8 pages long. So I didn't want to put up a whole load of slides that cover all the particular pages, and I've picked out a few bits and pieces from these 2 pages as well as throughout, just so you get to know the kind of things that can crop up, and what we're starting to call them are tripwires, the kind of things that if you don't do or you don't understand, you will get tripped up by them, and it means there'll be an issue with the endpoint assessment somewhere. This particular assessment, this particular standard in the assessment plan has been given a £2,000 cap by the government, so that's £2,000 government contribution, which means that £1,000 must come from the employer. So overall, this apprenticeship is worth £3,000 per learner. The assessment strategy, the assessment plan itself, the first part I'll identify is in the second paragraph, and it's the last sentence, and it's the standard sentence in everything. Independent assessment organisations referenced within this plan must be on the SFA register. So unless you're on the register, you can't do the endpoint assessment. It's as simple as that. And then the beginning of the third paragraph, apprentices must undertake a programme of study in a suitable care setting and complete the care certificate as part of a high quality induction programme. So the first month or couple of months or whatever, how long it takes for that induction to take place, by the end of that period of time they must have taken and completed and achieved the care certificate, or else they can't move any further forward. So there's a little bit of a tripwire straight away. So your curriculum plan, your delivery plan for this particular programme must take into account the fact the care certificate must be achieved as part of induction and not later on, because that will prevent them from going any further. And then later on in that same paragraph, the last couple of sentences, the diploma in health and social care, level 2 England, is completed with the support of a learning provider or employer who trains apprentices. So we have both aspects here. We have a provider as well as an employer who may be involved in that level 2 diploma. Apprentices can only attempt the separate and mandatory endpoint assessment once the diploma and care certificate have been attempted and achieved. Remember, we have a 12 to 18 month period here, but part of that later time is the endpoint assessment. So again, the need for planning and the kinds of activities on and off the job training, etc., need to be done, really needs to be looked at and planned out in quite a detailed way per learner. The fourth paragraph, synoptic endpoint assessment, will include 2 distinct components: a situational judgment test, which is a multiple choice question paper, and a professional discussion. To achieve the final certification of the apprenticeship, they must have achieved both of these endpoint assessments in addition to the care certificate and diploma. So there's 4 elements, 2 before the endpoint assessment and 2 of the endpoint assessment, that must be achieved, completed, before the apprentice can be signed off as being competent in this particular standard. And then the last part there on the first page, delivery of training and any qualification-based assessment up to the endpoint will be considered as being on programme. So it's still the same kind of thing. The endpoint assessment will be the only assessment that can count towards the achievement of the apprenticeship certificate. So you can add a load more things in whilst on programme, but ultimately the only thing that counts for the apprentice to achieve this is the endpoint assessment. But remember, according to this, they still have to do the care certificate and the diploma before then. So, you know, it's a different way of looking at things. The second page, well, that's just a little overview of the endpoint assessment. You have the assessment method, professional discussion, the areas assessed, so we've got knowledge and skills, who is it assessed by, what the grading is. So we've got pass, merit and distinction, and it's a straight 50-50 split. Some assessment plans have 4 or 5 different methods, and some, those different methods have different weightings. Knowledge might be 10%, practical activities might be 30%, that kind of thing. But this is a straightforward 50-50. And the minimum achievement level is a pass. So just a reiteration of the qualifications on programme assessment. A couple of bits and bobs that I haven't put up here. I'll just leave that up there, just to let you know what is, what it says in a little bit more detail. Before the apprentice is judged ready to undertake the endpoint assessment by the employer and the learning provider, so that's both have the actual, so they both have the actual say on whether the apprentice is ready. Achieve the level 2 diploma, complete the care certificate, achieve the level 1 literacy and numeracy, and undertake a self-assessment in the last month of the apprenticeship to enable the assessor to see whether they are confident of taking on board all the training. So that's something else that is in the mix there. So we're not just talking about qualifications, we're talking about English and Maths, we're now talking about a couple of other things. And just a few other bits and bobs from the actual assessment plan itself. I haven't put them on, like I said, it's 8 pages long, so it'll be 4 slides of lots of straightforward text. Basically, the assessment will be undertaken. The situational judgment test has got 3 grades. It's got pass, merit and distinction. It is 60 questions long, so it will take around about an hour and 15 minutes to complete. And it is under exam conditions, so it will have to be invigilated wherever it takes place. It can be online, it could be paper-based, but it will have to be invigilated somewhere along the line. And the professional discussion is a 45-minute long discussion. It is very prescriptive in what it looks at. There will be standardised questions that the apprenticeship board that has been set up to oversee the quality assurance of this plan will be putting forward, and deviation from those questions will not be allowed. So you can't add any separate questions in that you want to. You have to choose which questions you want to ask based on what the result of the multi-choice question test is, and the review, the self-assessment that the learner has put forward. So asking anything that is not within the standard isn't allowed. End of story. And it may well be that if something is, and it's recorded, because everything has to be recorded through the professional discussion, that the actual assessment could be classed as null and void, and therefore the learner would fail that particular part of it. So that's the last thing we want. You have to follow this procedure quite specifically. The final judgment lies solely with the independent assessor, as has always been the case with the standards. An apprenticeship board will be set up, or is being set up, by Skills for Care, and they will be the ones that will oversee all the quality assurance. They will do sampling, and they have a matrix later on in the document that actually shows how they're going to talk about it, how they're going to do it. There will be a fee for it, but it will be a non-profit making, it says non-profit making exercise, so it will be enough to cover the administration of the sampling. Whether or not that is part and parcel of the funding, it doesn't say. It may be, it may not be. I'm hoping it is, and and it saves any extra, sort of cost to either the employer or provider. And just one last thing I'll say out here. It says it should be noted that all components forming part of the endpoint assessment will be made available to every assessment organisation which is registered for the purpose of the endpoint assessment. All online tests will therefore be made available as an open source or equivalent at the Skills for Care website. So nobody can deviate, change, use their own assessment methodology, questions or tests in any way, shape or form. It will be provided, and that is what will have to be followed. That is where it's going to be given the actual standardization, the consistency, you know, the validity, the accuracy, you know, all of those areas, because it's all provided, there's no deviation, so it makes it much easier to make sure that somebody in Cornwall is getting the same level and the same achievement as somebody in Cumbria. So just have a look at a couple of questions that have come up here. You were able to, have the costs of EQA been suggested? No, they haven't, Phil. Unfortunately not. I've got a feeling that as and when all this information starts coming out, we'll start to get some more information on what the costs of the EQA will be. We have the costs of the endpoint assessment itself, and I'll take you through those. The endpoint assessment cost says in the document that it will be between 15 and 30% of the cost of the apprenticeship. So we're looking at this apprenticeship being a £3,000 figure. So 15 to 30% of that 3,000 means that the endpoint assessment cost will be somewhere between £450 to £900. Now, in quite a few other assessment plans, there has been a figure physically given. So some have said this will cost £300, some have said this will cost £500. This has a range, but they've quantified that by saying it's one of the largest, if not the largest, current framework apprenticeship out there, with over 19,000 achievements annually, and that the hope is there'll be quite a number of endpoint assessment organisations involved, which will then drive down the overall cost of the endpoint assessment. And what they're hoping is that will eventually fall down to below 20%, which still makes the cost of the endpoint assessment £600. So when you look at a £3,000 apprenticeship, if you're working on the initial 15 to 30% for assessment, that leaves you between £2,100 and £2,550 to deliver the on-programme side. If it drops and it goes below 60, it goes below 20%, then obviously it'll pro-rata itself down on that way. But remember, the £3,000 currently is the 2,000 from the government and the 1,000 from the employer. If the employer wants to put in more, they can do, and that will make more money available for other things. However, if you're talking about negotiations and you're talking about getting the contract sorted out, if, for example, the contract worked out that you would deliver it for £2,500, then your endpoint assessment cost would work out between £375 and £750. So that's instantly reducing what you've got for your on-programme delivery quite substantially. It means that your on-programme delivery could be between £1,700 and £2,100, which is quite a difference between £2,100 and £2,500. So when we're talking about negotiations and we're discussing with employers, you need to work out what your approach is, and you need to be sure that what it is that you will go for as the minimum you can deliver the on-programme side. And if you look at being an endpoint assessment organisation, you can cover your cost for endpoint assessment from what's left out of that, because endpoint assessment, some of what's been asked for, it is costly to set up. So that's a standard and assessment in a little bit more detail. I hope that's answered or even triggered a lot of questions, which is quite handy, because it means that that side of things is working. So moving on, just to reiterate, the pre-gateway delivery, that's your on-programme stuff, and it's basically the gateway is a point when the employer, apprentice and provider, if required, decide the requirements in the assessment plan have been met and the apprentice is ready for the endpoint assessment. The pre-gateway delivery is the activity that happens before this point, and as we've seen in the adult care standard there, it includes qualifications, including English and maths requirements, any training in the workplace by the employer, or anything else that will benefit the learner in their role. One of the maritime standards that's out there, the able seaman for the Merchant Navy, There's about a dozen professional qualifications in there that have to be achieved before they go forward for Gateway. Things like, rope tying, safety on deck, first aid, etc., etc. So that's why you need to look at the standard, you need to look at the assessment plan in a lot of detail, and to use a word, I like using a lot, deconstruct them. What it is each thing asking for, and is it possible? Is it achievable? That's what I said at the bottom. Always check the assessment plan, as it will say whether any specific issues need to be addressed and completed before going forward. So the endpoint assessment, again, a reiteration of what it is. Under the reformed system, all apprenticeship standards must be assessed by an independent assessment organisation, so that's somebody that is independent or has independence of the delivery and the employer. And training providers and employees will need to work together to find the right endpoint assessment organisation for their learners. So there's a nice bit of collaboration there, or a new aspect of collaboration required. A more holistic assessment at the end of the apprenticeship allows apprentices to be assessed once they have gained the maximum experience possible. It gives employers and providers much more control of the design and structure of the on-programme side. So, you're free to do quite a lot in there, as well as having to do what's mandated. And it also frees up providers from continuous assessment, allowing them to focus more on training and learning. Now, a lot of the events I've been to recently, it's sort of 50-50 as to whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm a qualified assessor, IV, EV. I've been involved in education for 30 years. I'm trained now. I've got to say that I know the whole process and from start to finish. And I know some people are good at the training side and some people are good at the assessment side. So, and some people are very good all-rounders. So you need to start thinking about whether or not you need, you want to concentrate on delivery, or whether you want to go forward for the actual assessment side itself. Because both of them, really need to be looked at as a business plan in its own right. So, endpoint assessment methods. This is a sort of a snapshot of some of the methods included in the assessment plans out there already. So we have the online MCQ test. A lot of them say online, but paper-based is still available. And the range at the moment between 45 and 90 minutes. So I don't know about you, but I haven't yet sat down to a multi-choice question test that's an hour and a half long, and I think it'd be quite daunting. So that could be something you look at as part of the on-programme site, preparing a learner for a lengthy online test. Practical observations, the average again appears to be 2 hours. So after 2-hour practical observation, and that could be in a work environment, or it could be in a test centre that's set up exactly as a work environment because of cost and things like that. Presentations can be of work in general or a key activity, whatever has been identified. A project or portfolio work-based and not really much different to what a portfolio looks like now. Professional discussion could be based around the project, but there will be specific criteria and a scoring or grading matrix for the professional discussion. The same way as for the following one as well. For an interview, the average time 45 minutes, formal interview, a minimum, a lot of it say is a minimum of 2 to 3 people. Again, with very specific questions that are chosen, and in this case for the adult care worker, are set by the actual assessment body, the Skills for Care team itself, and another grading and scoring matrix. So it's very, very procedural, a lot of what's going on, but very, very specifically defined as well. And again, for some organisations that might be a good thing because they're used to that, or it might not be a good thing because it means a whole new raft of resources and cost, etc., etc. There are others out there, and there are like to be some new approaches to old favourites. For example, quite a few of the business-related ones and management and that are talk about Skype for an interview or an online discussion and things like that. So if you're used to doing that, brilliant. If you're not, then you might start having to think about how you can introduce it somewhere. And business administration and customer service are obviously two of the areas the standards are being looked at, where not only will it save costs, but it's probably quite a majority of how some of the learners actually use and work with the employer. They use those kind of tools almost on a daily basis. Moving on, just to have a look at another kind of endpoint assessment. This is for hospitality team members, so this is out there now. This is another ready for delivery standard. So for this particular one, we have a 90-minute on-demand multiple choice test, including scenario-based questions. So on-demand means basically you can take it any time. It doesn't have to be, specifically, part of a period within the apprenticeship, within the endpoint assessment. It can be done any time. The 2-hour practical observation in the working environment. So this is actually in the workplace. A business project, and the candidate can choose a project and agrees with the endpoint assessor, externally marked against standardized criteria. So our criteria is already there and is then externally marked. And then a 40-minute professional discussion. So there's 4 aspects to this one, where there was 2 for the adult care worker. So again, if you work in both of those areas, you can now see how much demand is going to be on whether you do the delivery side and you concentrate on the delivery side because you're brilliant at it, or whether you start thinking about becoming an endpoint assessment organisation because you see your expertise starting to drift that way. So that's that part of the standard side put around. So the standard document itself, the assessment plan, what is endpoint assessment, the depth of it, the kinds of activities that are currently coming out within endpoint assessment, and a couple of examples from live, ready for delivery standards that are currently up there on the government website, which people can start registering against if you're on road, or you need to go on road and have a look. And if you want to start registering, great. So, moving on, our friend the levy. There's nothing new on this other than that last bullet point. The government is introducing the levy. It will be collected through PAYE, set at 0.5% of an employee's pay bill. Employees will have an allowance of £15,000 offset against their levy payments, so it's only £3 million plus. Technically, employees who pay the levy should get more out of it than they put in. SMEs, again, technically will not have access to the levy until 2018, but there is an interim arrangement that's been mentioned. However, the guidance that we should have had before Parliament broke up on the 21st of July hasn't been given out. So I was just did a little bit of a time frame, a little bit of a time scale, and Parliament returns around about the 2nd of September, or something like that. At the end of September, beginning of October, it's party conference season, so you can basically say there's 3 weeks out, and then about 6 or 8 weeks after that, it's the autumn statement. Which is the autumn sort of mini budget type thing, and then the skills funding letter comes out, and then everything else drops out of that with regards to the funding for our side of the sector and that. So we haven't got a lot of time for the government to actually produce this guidance for everybody to understand it, for it then to disappear for a little bit while the party conference is on, for something else potentially to come its way through the autumn statement, and then finally, for it to be live on the 6th of April. So we really are squeezing on what is potentially a year-long workload into about 6 months here. So we're hoping that as soon as Parliament comes back, the first week of September, there will be a document saying this is how it's going to work. So, one of the last slides here. So, getting ready for delivery and assessment. So, a few pointers here, things that we've picked up, questions that we've been asked when we've been out and about on our travels, at events, and from our sales team being out and about. So, there's a few pointers here. Get familiar with the standards and the assessment plans you want to deliver. So, look at them, and as I said before, use that word deconstruct. What are you good at? What do you want to do? What can you do? Do you want to go for endpoint assessment or not? Have a look at all those areas, and if you want to, do your own kind of rating on where you think your strengths are, because some of them will take more resource and a lot more work for very little return than others. And on that side of it, I'm sort of basically looking at the endpoint assessment to begin with. Keep your employer contacts up to date. Talk to your employers. You know, let them know what's going on, even if it's a case of, I'm not too sure, I'm waiting for more information. That is better than I don't know. You know, and a lot of employers still, you know, myself going out and about and speaking to people at conferences and things, they're still not too sure what is actually going on and actually where all the reforms have come from in the first place. So stay up to date with the levy and Ofsted requirements. Ofsted at the moment are not technically heavily involved in it, in apprenticeship standards, but if they are there, they will take a peek at them. Whether that's formal or informal, I don't know yet. I know there's just been an update of the FA Skills Inspection Handbook has just come out there today, so I need to have a look at that. I didn't get a chance to look at it beforehand. Get on all the registers you need to be on. You need to be on RODO. There's a new one coming up, the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers, that's ROADP, and ROAR, as I like to call it, and frequently shout out in the office, the Register of Apprentice Assessment Organisations. That's if you want to offer the endpoint assessment. The SFE are hoping to have one base set of information on the financial side, so if you want to go for each one separately after that, there's not a lot more to do. At the moment, you have to apply to get on each register separately. They're hoping to streamline that. But again, they've said the autumn, which is anywhere between September and the beginning of December. So let's see how that pans out. Think about what your sales, marketing and business plans are. If you haven't already, does this kind of work fit in anymore? Especially endpoint assessment. It's a new thing and it might need a new strategy and a new strand or actually a new arm of your business to actually take forward. Or any changes needed to your IQA activity. IQA, Internal Quality Assurance, is referenced in the assessment plans. Again, look at it, see what it says. Do you have to change anything to meet that requirement? Consider how you will operationalise your offer. So look at your resources. What are your staffing? Do you need to invest in IT? Where you're based, can you offer endpoint assessment locally, regionally, nationally, or not at all? A lot of things to consider there, and again, it could all link back to your business plan. Start training these staff and keep them informed of all developments if you haven't done already. This is a key thing. The more people that understand and help them talk about this, then the better. Seek help if required, and I'll put down the ATAs, Apprenticeship Training Association, may be a solution. May not be, but may be. You might want to think about becoming part of one. Have a look at the provider ready documents, very useful. Now, I will get something out before I go on leave tomorrow, or holiday for 10 days, haha. With a load of links on to get out to everybody so they can look at all the different places and documents, etc., that are currently out there that actually help. And the provider readiness group documents actually do contain a little bit more than the standard and the assessment plan to help you guys, help providers and employers understand some of the more technical aspects. And lastly, I've just put there, sign up to every available update from government.uk. Go on to the apprenticeship standards, hunt them out, sign up for every update. It's annoying sometimes. I remember one day somewhere in March, I think it was, I got 35 separate emails. Each email had a separate standard attached to it. But you get them. You don't miss anything, and that's a key point. So, what are we up to, NCFE? Well, we're in the game. We're being involved directly in the logistics Trailblazers since 2014. We've worked with the employer group. We've had an excellent baptism into the world of Trailblazers. It hasn't always been plain sailing. We've lost people from the employer group. We've gained new people on the employer group. And it's all been massively helpful to what we're doing and where we're coming from. All Trailblazers are employer-led, and obviously if there's any employees out there, we're quite happy to have a chat with you. We're interested, as well as having a chat and talking about things with our customers, our providers. We can provide information on the new standards as they become available, while supporting you with your existing SASE frameworks. Although there has been yesterday yet another consultation come out about removing some more SASE frameworks. So again, when you sign up for government updates, you will get all this information. It'll fly through into your inbox, and it keeps you really up to date as to what's going on. And at the end, we continue to evaluate and explore endpoint assessment for standards in all of our priority areas. There's probably on my radar anyway, within the policy side, about 40, 45 or 50 different standards I'm keeping an eye on, and I'll get information and I'll be feeding that up to and soon to my colleagues as to whether or not this is the worth taking forward, or in any other kind of way. So that's it. That's the actual basis of the information. Some of the questions that have come up, let's have a see. We've got a few on the levy there. Can we get a copy of the, well, yeah, you get a copy of that, I think. That should be all right, yeah. Provider become a delivery partner and assessor in two standards in different sectors. This is an intriguing one. Basically, if you are involved in the delivery of a standard, you can't endpoint assess those apprentices that you are taking through the delivery. So you need to consider very carefully if you can do that. If you want to do that, then there's about 5 different ways you can actually set up yourself as a delivery organisation as well as an endpoint organisation. But what you really need to have is a very distinct border or glass wall between those two functions, because again, if there's any perception of favoritism or entirely following the endpoint assessment process for any of the apprentices, then again it could render those achievements null and void. So again, it's something to do with the business plan. Think about whether you want to do both or whether you want to actually undertake one or the other. Have you seen any plans? This is Phil Collin. Have you seen any plans that have had the standards and learning outcomes amplified into assessment criteria? Not really, Phil. No, what you see in the actual standard is what you get. What is happening, and we're looking at it a little bit ourselves, is if there's any qualifications, because remember, one of these new standards is not always a qualification required. If there's any qualifications that can help support the achievement of the behaviours or the skills or the knowledge, then we're doing some mapping work on them. We've just started doing that. And that might be one of the ways, but actually the amplification from the standard statements themselves into assessment criteria isn't happening. It's, that's another one of the changes that we're looking at. Continuous assessment, Karen. Continuous assessment still needs to take place to achieve the level 2 diploma in health and social care. It certainly does. But remember, again, it's all about that continuous assessment will be taking place on the on-program side, and the achievement of that diploma is only up to and including that particular gateway point. Once that's done, the endpoint assessment is the only thing that will confirm competence. So yes, the continuous assessment will take place, and it's good that it takes place, but the endpoint assessment is the only thing that confirms the competence. So again, if you're thinking about doing both sides, delivery as well as assessment, then you could be actually doubling up on your workload. Something to think about. This is Abigail. Hello, Abigail. Will all SMEs be allocated a pot of funds to pay for staff training and development? I've heard it will be £15,000. The £15,000 is the amount of money that will come round from the levy side in order to support organisations on this side. Technically, that money should only be used for direct apprenticeship delivery and or endpoint assessment. Whether or not there'll be a relaxation of that to include staff training and development, I don't know. The funny thing is about the levy is that it's very specific what it can and can't be used for in England, but in Scotland, in Northern Ireland and Wales, potentially it could be used for that. That's one of the strange things. That's why we're waiting for this guidance to come out to tell us exactly what we can and can't do, how much we get, etc., etc. It's really frustrating that it hasn't come out yet. When does this go live, the new standards? In April 2017. Abigail, again, if we're talking about the adult care worker standard, Abigail, it is ready for delivery now. It is up there. It is on the government list. It has the money attached to it, and if so required, if you go into Roto through the Bravo Solutions, etc., and hunt it out, you should be reliably informed by the SFA, be able to register learners against it. It's entirely up to you, though. Is it true, Abigail, again, is it true there's only going to be one award body per sector? Slight confusion here, I think, Abigail. That's to do with the Sainsbury review and the skills plan. Now, there's mention of apprenticeships in that, but whether or not those apprenticeships will look and feel the same as what we've currently got in the Trailblazers, we don't know. Some people are saying yes, and it's just a standard thing. Some people are saying, well, it might actually change a little bit. Assessment organisations will develop a bank of business-related projects. Is this happening yet? Not that I know of. That's not to say some haven't already started. Remember, there's only 18 of them out there, and they're in very limited number of standards. A lot of them are in the manufacturing and engineering and aerospace industries. I think there's a couple for dental care and a couple for the digital side. So if it's happening very slowly. Who is responsible for updating the assessment practice? Hillary, I'm assuming it's the apprenticeship assessment. Yes, CPD is a big thing here. You really do need to consider the CPD of your staff. You know, whether it be through giving them documents to read or through your normal standardisation procedures, etc., etc. But yes, that's something you really need to be on top of. Where can I find the standards for childcare? June, if the childcare standards haven't yet been approved, we're waiting for that to come through. We know the standard is there, we know the draft assessment plan is there, but it hasn't yet been released. Well, we're hoping, I got an email a couple of weeks ago from one of my colleagues that actually had the draft assessment plans on, and we were hoping for them to be out, you know, sort of soon, but they haven't appeared yet. So you know, it's a sort of a keep an eye on things. And lastly, is the updated standard you mentioned, is it now assigned a unique reference number? That's a strange reference numbers, I think, are things of the past now. I haven't yet seen any apprenticeship standard that actually has a number attached to it. It's just the actual standard title itself. However, that's not to say that they won't. We don't know whether or not, you know, the government will actually do anything like that. Paul, will there be any allowances for learners with learning disabilities? There was a report came out last week, I think, on apprenticeships for those with learning disabilities. So if I can find it, I'll include the link in the document when some of the answers that come out. What will happen to the age grant, the SMEs, if there's an interim review of the levy? Where will we be able to find this information? I'll have a look, Rowena. The age grant is still available, as far as I know, until at least April 2017. If you operate in the Leeds area, I know they're doing an enhanced support age grant at the moment for employers. And I think Liverpool's doing the same. But again, that's something else that will be mentioned in the levy guidance. It's all linked to this document that says this is the levy and this is how it's going to work. Right, everybody, that's it. Thank you very much for being involved. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope it's been informative. I hope